to digest for us.
And mixed bag, I think, is the right way to describe it. There was a lot of different things. And the Big Ten had two of the craziest games of the whole bowl season.
Yeah, unbelievable. The Purdue and Ohio State games were remarkable.
If we could have a Rose Bowl like that every year, I'd be pretty happy with it.
Oh, man. That was an amazing, amazing game. Those were two all-timers. You're right. I mean, those are games that we'll talk about 15, 20 years from now as just being the best of what bowl season can be. And again, games that included opt-outs and not all the players playing, but still, for pure entertainment value, you can't do much better. Let's get to our big story, and it is, of course, the Big Ten and the bowls. Again, a solid bowl season. 6 wins, tied for the second most ever. 2-1 in the New Year's Six, highlighted by thrilling wins for Ohio State and Michigan State. Some amazing individual performances. I mean, C.J. Stroud and Aiden O'Connell both throwing for more than 500 yards. Maryland, Minnesota got some nice wins, among others. But the biggest story, obviously, is the CFP. You never want to lead with the negative, but frankly, look, that's just the biggest story. So you also don't want to be accused of being, state-run media and, burying the true story here. The story in college football is the college football playoff. And frankly, it did not go well for the Big Ten. I was there with Howard and Jerry, and this game was over, frankly, for Michigan. By the end of the first quarter, it was just apparent they couldn't hang.
It was just like you said, from the beginning, it was just not a close game, and it was basically over. And it's really tough because, Michigan had such an incredible season, but to end it that way is such a sour taste. And this has been the case in the playoff era because we have seen so many blowouts. You have Brian Kelly telling fans not to walk off a ledge after Notre Dame loses in the playoff. Like, it's really hard to end a season with a blowout like this, even if it is the eventual national champion.
I thought the motivation point that you made was a really good one. I thought about this a lot in the press box because you just kind of reach a point where the game's over. And then your
mind is wandering?
Yeah, well, what you're saying, you're trying to process it because I'm with you. I thought all week Michigan had a good chance. I thought they were going to win the game. I really did. I mean, based on kind of what we had seen from Georgia the last time out. But when you think about Georgia in that SEC championship game, they literally had nothing to play for. I mean, I understand beating Alabama is something to play for because Alabama has been the albatross around their neck. There's no question about it that you are trying to kind of bury those demons a little bit against Bama. But Bama had everything to play for. And Nick Saban, when he's highly incentivized, right, because they didn't win that game, they weren't making the college football playoff. So they had everything to play for. Georgia didn't really have much to play for. And I have to say, I underestimated just how good Georgia's defense is. The speed of that defense was it was remarkable in person. It was breathtaking at times how good they were. And then I just thought Stetson Bennett had a fabulous game. They had a tremendous game plan. It kind of came out afterwards that a lot of those quick out plays and kind of the bubble screens and stuff that they ran were things that Bennett was calling at the line of scrimmage, which, man, hats off to him.
There's a reason that they kept him, right? That he's the starter. And everyone has been questioning Kirby Smart about this for a long time. But it's stuff like that. I mean, they just feel so comfortable with him in the quarterback position. And, you talk about motivation. He's been hearing for 3 weeks that he might not be a good enough quarterback to win a national title. He was phenomenal. He was really, really good. And those short plays really neutralized Aiden Hutchinson, David Ojabo. I mean, they didn't have enough time to get to the quarterback to apply pressure.
No sacks, 2 tackles for loss for Michigan, just line of scrimmage dominance for the Bulldogs. And again, you mentioned it, from Michigan's point of view, and that this is a familiar refrain for teams in the college football playoff who get there in impressive fashion and have a year that they can really feel good about, and you go in with all kinds of optimism, and then your final kind of image of the season is just getting squashed and kind of it being non-competitive. That being said, I think about Michigan. I think about them tying a school record for wins. I think about them ending their longest Big Ten title drought of all time. The school that is, I say all the time, has won more Big Ten titles than any other. I think about them beating Ohio State for the first time in a decade. I think about them going from unranked in the preseason for the first time in 6 years to the college football playoff. I mean, I think there's a lot of positives that you can hang your hat on, but it also did show you how far you have to go.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest, we talk about like the gap, right? When you talk about, okay, there's a couple teams that can win a national championship and then there's a gap. And there's a bunch of other programs that are in great places. But, we talk about this with Notre Dame. We've talked about it with Oklahoma over the years. It's like, well, what is that difference of making the playoff versus having a chance to win it? And that's where Michigan has now found itself. Ohio State obviously has won a national championship in this era. They did that. They closed that gap. But it's a really hard place to be in because there's just not that much of a difference. But then you see it in the size and the speed and athleticism all over the field against Georgia, where you're like, okay, well, that is that razor thin margin. That is that difference between being able to win it and just to get here.
Yeah, they were just demonstrably better. I mean, they were clearly better. You could have played the game 10 times and maybe Michigan would have won one of them, but I mean, just in person, it was obvious that there is still a talent gap. And again, that's not to take anything away from the season that Michigan had. But again, this is borne out in recruiting rankings and kind of all this other stuff.
Well, I think Harbaugh said after the game that this was one of the best seasons in Michigan football.
And it was.
And it was. And it was. And I think that is something to take away, too, because it's kind of like basketball when one team gets to end the NCAA tournament really happy and everyone else has these heartbreaking losses and we see them like just like in agony on the court. It's kind of like that. Like, not everyone's going to have a really happy ending to their season, but you do have to remember and reflect, and they bring so many guys back. I mean, this is going to be a huge building block for Michigan, but it's just really hard to process that when, like you said, you got squashed at the end of the season and you saw that gap that still exists.
Let's speak more broadly about a point you brought up, which is the college football playoff. And frankly, it just has not lived up to the semis anyway.
Yeah.
Have not lived up to our expectations, like our hopes for what this could be. So now we've seen 16 college football playoff semifinals. 12 of them have been decided by 17 or more points. I mean, it's just staggering, right? They're just not close games for whatever reason. And I get that a lot of people are tired of the SEC, and so now we have this all SEC championship game. It's not great for the sport, but what are you going to do? I mean, those are the two best teams. Clearly, they're playing for the championship. You wouldn't want a sport any other way. But for the health of the sport, it is a national sport, but there are regional pockets to what we do here. I mean, as evidenced by a Big Ten network and SEC network, right? I mean, this has always been a sport that begins regionally and then tries to figure out a way to crown a national champion. And this is kind of our new way of doing this. So we're 8 years into this process. What can we do to make this more compelling?
Expand it, add more games, because right now you have 3 meaningful games at the end of the season, and 2 of them are not competitive almost every single year. I mean, that's just not enjoyable to watch. It's the best sports regular season that we have. And then the postseason is a mess right now. And so there's ways to fix it. And I think it's important to start back by when they went to 4. When you go from 2 in the BCS era to 4, it was, okay, well, let's give ourselves a little wiggle room to find the 2 best teams in college football, because sometimes they might lose a game early or, whatever it might be. The wiggle room is working, right? They're finding the best team is not missing a chance to play for a national championship. But now it's about the rest of the sport and the health of everyone. It's about access so that all these teams are starting the season with a path to the playoff. If you have a 12-team playoff with a first-round bye, then teams 5 through 12 are a lot closer to each other than, 1 to 12, than 3 to 4, right? Like, or 2 to 3. Like, we've seen that there's a gap there. I think if you add more games, more things to play for, less opt-outs with the star players because they still have a path to a national championship, but you could have games, some of them on campus, which would be exciting. You'd have teams that could get hot at the end of the season and make a run maybe. Maybe that would give us a better semifinal. You might end up with the same teams in the championship.
Yes, 100%.
But it would be more interesting along the way.
No, I agree, right. I don't think the argument for expanding the playoff is that you're going to shift the balance of power somehow, or that the same teams aren't going to make it. Although I think it becomes easier to recruit high-level players if you say, hey, we've made the playoff here 3 of the last 4 years, or whatever it is, right?
Right now, it's like 5 programs can recruit to that, right?
No, absolutely. So I do think there is an argument to be made that it may diffuse the talent a little bit. But even if it doesn't, it still gives you more compelling games along the way. So I don't think there's any question. You have to expand it. I hope we can reach some sort of conclusion to do that works for everyone. I do want to shift gears a little bit because I want to talk about the Rose Bowl in Ohio State, which was one of the all-time great games, as we said off the top, Nicole. And again, some of the records that were set in this game, I mean, staggering numbers that were put up. The Buckeyes offense was remarkable. They averaged more than 10 yards per play. A first down every time they snapped it. Jackson Smith and Jigba, 347 receiving yards, most ever for any player in a bowl game in the history of college football. C.J. Stroud's 573 passing yards, third most ever in a bowl, most for a Big Ten player, second most for a Big Ten player in any game ever. Despite all that, OSU never led until the final 5 minutes. Defense left a bit to be desired, although I will say it improved dramatically in the second half. Biggest takeaway for you here, other than, man, this was a lot of fun?
Yeah, I mean, it was the most entertaining bowl game that we had. And it was awesome because of the narrative coming in that, like, their best players weren't going to be there. And you saw the next best players, or maybe, I mean, Jackson Smith Enigma is probably one of the best players all season long. Yes. We just didn't talk about him that way. It was so fun. I think it cements a couple of these guys as Heisman favorites for next season.
I saw your Heisman tweet for next year with the list of one.
Well,
Jackson Smith
I'll make
and Jigba.
2. We'll add C.J. Stroud. C.J. Stroud will also have the numbers to be in there. But, I mean, it was insanely fun, and it reminds you that these teams, like the Ohio States of the world, well, maybe some of their 5-star guys are leaving, but they've got these guys behind them that are just so fun. And you get to watch them kind of grow up and get that confidence. And it was just a lot of fun to see the scoring back and forth at the end of that second quarter. And then, like you said, I mean, the defense did play better in the second half, and that's where you got to have some encouragement, plus a defensive coordinator change for Ohio State. So there is some of this stuff that you're going to pull into the offseason.
Jim Knowles has a little work to do on that defense, although they really did. Second half, they were great. I mean, they gave up 10 points. They gave up about 3 yards per play. That's why they had a chance to win the game. Absolutely. No, they really played well, to their credit, in the second half. You did mention, look, there were opt-outs in this game, and it became a big storyline, not just in this one, but throughout college football, the most obvious ones being Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, I would say. Jackson Smith and Jigba, Marvin Harrison Jr. kind of filled in that gap a little bit. There's some big news, though, made before the game on Saturday. This is Kirk Herbstreit of ESPN. He said this of opt-outs, quote, "I just don't understand. If you don't make it to the playoff, how is it meaningless to play football and compete? Isn't that what we do as football players? We compete. I don't know if expanding the playoff is going to change anything. I think this era of player just doesn't love football." It's a broad, sweeping generalization, which I've learned in this business is always dangerous. Like, try to avoid broad, sweeping generalizations. Look, I know Kirk quite well. I work with him. I certainly like him quite a bit. And he did try to backtrack a little later on Twitter, not very convincingly, I might add. He said, quote, "Some players love the game." What do you make of all this? I just think it's really hard when you have former players who played in a totally different era of college football. The coaches were not making $10 million a year. There weren't 42 bowl games. I mean, we're talking about opt-outs of the ones that are not the playoff games. So, yeah, if Ohio State's season is about playoff or bust, and ESPN, by the way, leans into that. Like, they're framing, and we all frame the sport as playoff matters so much. So if a team just misses the playoff, those are the games where we're seeing the opt-outs. And so I think that expanding the playoff to incorporate more games that matter would get rid of that. So that part of the comment I disagree with. But I just think you have these players who are really smart and aware of the dynamics. And they know that they're really close to their life-changing payday. And they don't want to risk it for a game that doesn't mean a national championship, a chance to play for a national championship. So I don't fault those guys, but I have a problem with people faulting these players. Like, if guys want to play, that's awesome. Like, I'm so glad to see them play in bowls, but I don't know why people, especially those of us who are around these athletes and we know them, we know how much it means to them to be part of the teams that they're on, but to make the NFL, all these things. Like, it's just, it seems difficult to square that with then saying someone doesn't love the sport. I mean, it's still trying to get their full-time job to be an NFL star. Like, that's what they're trying to do. Yeah, and it was just interesting. Obviously, Matt Corral then became a story later in the day when he got hurt, and thankfully it doesn't look like he's hurt too much. But then, there's this narrative that he had done it the right way, which you don't need to do. You can just say it's great that he wanted to play. It was right for him. And he made the decision. And different people make whatever feels like the right decision for them. And hats off to Matt Corral for playing, but I wouldn't have felt any differently about him if he didn't. He thought about it. He made the right decision. We had Jake Butt on our air before the game on Friday, and he said, I made what was the right decision for me at the time. I don't regret it. It's funny, I think back to, this is a little off topic, but my senior year of high school, second semester, everyone knows where they're going to college, right? And our calculus exam, final exam, was optional. And you could use it to raise your grade, but if you already had an A, you didn't have to take it, right? Because calculus is more about the AP test than anything. Right?
Did you take it?
No, I had an A. Why would I have taken it, right? So, I mean, if you think about it in those terms, right, like, why would you take it if all that it can do is hurt you? And you can say, well, playing doesn't hurt you. You're part of something great. But it's more broadly, it's about why would you do something that jeopardizes what you already have and all of your Hayes in the bar. Now, maybe you do it because you want to play with your teammates. And if you do,
one more time, yeah.
If you're Matt Corral, if you're Jake Butt, that is wonderful. But to say, no one came up to me and said I didn't love calculus. And oh, by the way,
but maybe you didn't.
And I don't love calculus. Can I just say clear, like, I hated calculus. But that being said, taking that exam and getting a C wouldn't have impacted my future one bit, right?
No.
So, but
an injury that drops you from the first round to the fourth round.
Exactly. Right? Like, if that's your kid, if that's my kid, I'm not going to tell them they have to play.
No, again, and I think it's just about not faulting the guys who don't play.
Absolutely.
Like, we can celebrate.
100%.
We don't say they're the right thing about college football, but we can celebrate Matt Corral, Tyler Linderbaum wanting to play, close out their careers. That's awesome.
Yes.
But we also don't have to demonize Kenneth Walker for not playing or demonize the Ohio State players for not playing in a system that's not designed to incentivize that game and playing in that game. And you know what else? We don't say that Brian Kelly doesn't love football because he left Notre Dame. Lincoln Riley, does he love football? We didn't do that. We don't do that. We only do that for the players, and that's what's unfair. Yeah.
One last thing I would say. If you have a great freshman year and then you opt out of the next 2 years, okay, then maybe. Right?
Like, we haven't been there yet.
No, we haven't. But again, we're talking about one game that, to your point, we are essentially told all year the only games that matter, right? I mean, we have these television programs building up who's going to be in those Final Four, and then we get on people's case for playing in the games that we basically said aren't as important. So, look, it's tough. And again, you stay away from broad sweeping generalizations. Yeah. People do what is right for them. Talked about a couple of the Big Ten bowls. Want to run through the rest of the slate. Michigan State went from down 11 entering the fourth quarter to a 10-point win over Pitt. Purdue, we talked about a bit, the Wild Music City Bowl win. Wisconsin a winner. How about Maryland? 54 points, third most ever for a Big Ten team in a bowl game. And Minnesota, fifth straight bowl win, tying a Big Ten record. Nicole Reed joining us. Lots of interesting storylines here. Let's start with Michigan State. Again, missing Kenneth Walker. Obviously, Kenny Pickett wasn't playing either on the other side for Pitt, so they weren't the only one missing a star player. But what does this win mean in your estimation for Michigan State going forward?
It's massive. I mean, we've talked about this so much all season long, but they are so ahead of schedule. I mean, you could see that they are building this, SEC-style program, right? Like, they started to feel good about the weight training and the off-season programming, but then we really saw that talent, the influx of talent from the transfer portal, figuring guys out, the culture, all those pieces really came together this season. And they've got to fix stuff defensively. Like, we know that. But you have got to be so excited about Mel Tucker. And the way that they came back in that game, according to my coworker, Colton Pouncey, it's the first time in 25 years that a team trailed by double digits in the fourth quarter and won by double digits. Like, that tells you so much about a team and the way that they play, the way that they beat Michigan. I mean, we've just seen so much about the buy-in here. So just a remarkable season, truly incredible, and a major building block.
No doubt. I mean, you win 11 games when you're picked last in your division. I'd say that's pretty good. And hey, they won it with a defensive touchdown at the end there. So they got to that double-digit margin with their defense, as big of a struggle as it was. Speaking of struggling defenses, the Music City Bowl was an absolute blast. And Purdue improved dramatically on defense all year. You wouldn't have necessarily known it against Tennessee, but I mean, this game was back and forth. But for Purdue to win with its two best players opting out, and one on each side of the ball, David Bell and George Karlaftis, man, I just think you have to feel great about where the Boilermakers are moving forward.
I agree. And I even felt that way about the regular season.
Yep.
I mean, I think they kind of snuck up on some people about what a great season and what a solid, team this has been. I mean, this is such a Jeff Brom offense, right? They love to throw the ball around, and they're so fun to watch, and that's exactly who they are. But you made the point that the defense took a big step this year, but really solid. I think they're going to be one of the teams that we're going to talk about, maybe talk ourselves into in the West. I mean, this is what we do, right? We get excited about Purdue and what Brom is building, and just such a fun end to a really fun season for Purdue.
By the way, Aiden O'Connell, 500-plus passing yards, 5 or more touchdown passes, and 3 TD passes of 60 yards or longer. The last person to do that in college football was Patrick Mahomes.
That's pretty good company.
And whatever happened to him, by the way? It's pretty amazing. It was a remarkable game. Wisconsin, more than 10 minutes on a drive to salt away a win. I mean, that's winning in the most Wisconsin way. By the way, some big Wisconsin news today. Joe Rudolph is moving on. He's going to go to Virginia Tech, so they'll have to find a new offensive coordinator. But that being said, what do we take away from the Badgers win?
I think it was exactly what you talked about. The way that they won the game was just so Wisconsin. And they're going to say, we're not going to give you the ball back. We're going to run the ball. We're going to have, Graham Mertz had some really nice passes in this game as well. I mean, there was just a lot to like, and Braylon Allen deserved that ending to the season. I mean, he was just, phenomenal all season. And, I am curious to see what shift they undergo in the offseason offensively. But to finish the season with an identity of a Wisconsin program that can run the ball and has a great defense is, I think, exactly where you want to be. If you're a Wisconsin fan, you're a Wisconsin player, like that is the identity of this program.
No doubt. Defense suffocating again. And I'm with you. Mertz had a couple moments. The stat line wasn't flashy, but there were some third downs where he needed to come through, and he did. Yeah. So give him credit there. I know quarterback play was caused some consternation throughout the year. How about their West compatriots, Minnesota, and kind of similar, kind of doing what they do? It was bully ball, I thought, for the Gophers. What did you take away from them?
Just an incredible season, considering I think they started or played 5 different running backs at the point of the season.
Yeah,
I mean, the amount of season-ending injuries.
And all went over 100 yards in a game.
That is a credit to the offensive line and continuity and the rest of this team, Tanner Morgan, everybody, right? Like, that is just remarkable. So it's kind of the same thing with Purdue. I don't know if, people realize what an accomplishment this season was, and they won the Axe game. I mean, like, there's a lot to like. They're also going to undergo an offensive change in the offseason as well than the coordinator position. So curious to see what that looks like. But again, just like, that's a really good season for Minnesota. There's not much you can complain about, especially if you started the year and said, hey, all these guys are going to get season-ending injuries at the running back position. I
do want to mention Maryland. We have them on that graphic as well. Man, that was impressive. First of all, you score a special teams touchdown, you score a defensive touchdown, and Tagovailoa was nearly perfect in that game.
He was great. Like, I think there's a lot of Terps fans who are really excited about him coming back. I mean, they're going to have all these young, talented guys that they've seen have these flashes or maybe be a little inconsistent at times. They're all coming back. They're all going to get better. There's a ton of excitement around Maryland. We talked about, the recruiting, the step up, with Mike Locksley. But to win a game like that, to even get to a bowl game, all these steps along the ladder, they're taking them, and there's going to be a ton of positive energy, momentum, excitement coming off a performance like that. These are just exhibitions, but this is one of the ones that really, jumps off into the next season.
Well, the previous game wasn't an exhibition against Rutgers, and they looked really good in that one, too. Last 2 games, it really seemed like a click. Great stuff, Nicole. Really appreciate it. The Big Ten lost to Pioneer on Friday as Dr. Christine Grant, a trailblazer in the world of women's athletics, passed away at the age of 85. Grant spent 27 years as Iowa's director of women's athletics, taking over just after the passage of Title IX and helping turn Iowa into a powerhouse in many women's sports. More broadly, she was the president of the AIAW, which oversaw women's athletics before the NCAA took over in the early 80s. She was a passionate advocate for gender equity in athletics. And among those Dr. Grant hired in her time at Iowa, actually her final hire, Lisa Bluder, the women's basketball coach for the Hawkeyes, kind enough to join us. And Lisa, first of all, my condolences on your loss. Give us a sense of the impact that Dr. Grant had on women's athletics.
Yeah, and Dave, I really don't think that there's enough time in this segment to really address everything that Dr. Grant has done for me personally, but also for every girl that is playing athletics at this point, playing sports. And, for us that are coaching it, I mean, she was one of a handful of women that fought to give us this opportunity to compete in the sports that we love today. So every person, every woman that's playing sport and having the opportunity to coach this game, we all have Dr. Grant to thank.
She's a truly fascinating person, and as I've learned about her, we actually did a great feature on her about 9 or 10 years ago here on the Big Ten Network on the Women's Sports Report that I remember vividly. And one of the things that stood out to me was listening to her talk. She is not from here, right? She is from Scotland originally, has a wonderful accent, was a field hockey player, came over, and her world was opened up to the world of college athletics in the United States, and then just saying, well, why aren't there the same opportunities for women that there are for men? So give us a sense of kind of how she advocated specifically for women's sports at Iowa generally, and then more broadly in the entire U.S.
She couldn't believe it when she came over here. Like you said, Dave, I mean, she was shocked that women's athletics was further behind in America than it was in Scotland and in Canada. So she went to work right away, and she was lucky, we were lucky that she was here at the University of Iowa, and we had a wonderful president, Sandy Boyd, who actually believed in women's athletics. And so it was truly a group of a small group of women that band together and created the AIAW, which Dr. Grant was president of, and then the NCAA took over in 1982. And Dr. Grant continued to fight for equality and for opportunities for women. And her stories are amazing. I mean, it really is book-worthy, movie-worthy to hear all of her attempts to create equality for women's athletics. Here at the University of Iowa, within the Big Ten and across the country, she talks about, going to Big Ten meetings when she was one of 2 female athletic directors, because our department was split into male and female at that time. And she was our women's athletic director, and Bump Elliott was our men's athletic director. And she remembers going to Big Ten meetings, and they asked her and this other woman athletic director to leave the meeting so they could take a photo of the male athletic directors. I mean, it's on and on, the type of things that she went through. And truly, she has changed my perspective on things and my thought process on how I go about things and what my purpose is as a basketball coach.
There's an amazing stat I saw that when she started up with the kind of women's athletic department, and essentially women's athletics before that were club sports at Iowa, and then when they got them to varsity status, she had a budget of $3,000 for all women's sports. And then in 2000, when she retired, it was about $7 million. Of course, it's much higher than that now. Why do you think Iowa in particular was committed to women's athletics, frankly, and was a trailblazer as a university? I think of C. Vivian Stringer. I think about field hockey and how great they were there. I mean, there are lots of great stories about Iowa being a dominant force really kind of from the get-go in women's athletics. How much of that was her?
I think a large part of it was her. I think it's also kind of our state. We had girls basketball being played in this state in the 1920s, 100 years ago. So I think we've always been like, our state has embraced girls playing sport. And when Dr. Grant came here, it was kind of a perfect storm. It was a perfect opportunity for her to really carry it to the next level. And she did it with a lot of pain. The stories of the locker rooms and not having practice times and driving to places. I mean, the players today don't understand what the women that fought for us to play have went through in order for us to have this opportunity. They just don't have a concept of what it really was like.
That's remarkable. I mean, I think back, I'm in my 50s. I think back to my childhood playing youth sports in a suburb where there were a ton of youth sports, and there was no softball for girls. They had to play baseball with the boys that they wanted to play. There was no girls soccer. Now I have 3 daughters, and I think about all the opportunities they've had. They're all good athletes and play on varsity high school teams. And so you think about all the progress that's been made, and Dr. Grant was a huge part of that. And yet I would still say, Coach Bluder, I mean, just last year with the women's basketball tournament and the weight room issue, and we saw these huge inequities that still exist. So what's kind of the next step here? It feels like we are far from a spot where we have true equity.
We are. And I think that is what probably saddened Dr. Grant in her last days more than anything, is that she never really saw true equity. What happened in the women's basketball tournament last year was unbelievable, but, she continued to fight. She started this ball rolling.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, it's for the rest of us that are still here, we need to keep that ball rolling. We need to keep pushing the limits. We can't be satisfied. And I think that's one of the things I learned from Dr. Grant the most is, don't be satisfied with what you have just because it's better than what you had the other day. Keep moving it forward, keep pushing the needle, keep pushing the envelope, because we have to get complete equity for women in sport. And then we're not there yet. But hopefully we're moving in the right direction, Dave.
Coach, while I have you here, I would be remiss if I did not ask you about your team. Caitlin Clark, 44 points yesterday in the win over Evansville, most a woman has ever scored at Carver Hawkeye Arena. I know you guys have had some COVID issues, as so many teams have throughout college basketball, but give us a sense of where you feel like your team is as you head into the meat of Big Ten play here.
I wish I had a sense of where our team was, and that's the problem, Dave, is just the ups and downs that we faced with COVID right now. We actually measured how many days we've been in practice in the last 6.5 weeks. We've had 15 days, 15 practices where we've been complete as a team. And so there's no consistency. But, Caitlin's accomplishment yesterday was truly something that we need to celebrate, because 44 points in a game, a great record for her. I'm really proud of her. And this is just the beginning of a remarkable career for Caitlin. So pretty exciting time for Iowa women's basketball.
No doubt. Well, we will hope that there are many more games to come here in the weeks ahead. I know COVID's been really frustrating for everyone. Lisa Bluder, again, thanks so much for spending a few moments with us remembering Dr. Grant, obviously a really special person, and glad we were able to get you on. Appreciate you taking the time.
Very thankful to have had the opportunity to be hired by her and to learn from her. And I just want to keep pushing her lessons. So thanks, Dave. I appreciate it.